Ambassador Jin sat quietly in the polished halls of the Galactic Council, his hands folded as the Vrak Empire representative slammed his taloned fist on the crystalline podium. The sound echoed through the massive chamber like thunder, making several smaller species flinch. For 30 years, humanity had been members of this grand alliance, and for 30 years they had been underestimated. The council chamber stretched out like a small city. Floating platforms held representatives from over 200 species, each one adapted to their specific atmospheric needs. The aquatic collective floated in their water-filled bubbles, their tentacles swaying gracefully. The silicon-based architects stood motionless as statues, their rock-like forms glowing with internal heat. High above, the energy beings flickered like living lightning, their communications coming through translation devices that hurt to listen to. These soft Deathworlders from Terra, the Vrak hissed, his 4 eyes gleaming with contempt as he gestured toward the human delegation. Barely survive their own gravity wells. Look at them, they break bones from simple falls, tire after mere hours of exertion, and lack even basic predatory features. The Vrak stood nearly 3 meters tall, his exoskeleton gleaming like polished obsidian. Razor-sharp spines ran along his arms, and his mouth opened to reveal rows of serrated teeth. When he moved, servos in his powered armor whined softly, amplifying his already impressive strength. Behind him, a holographic display showed images of human soldiers from training exercises, soldiers who appeared to struggle with basic combat maneuvers, who seemed to move slowly compared to other species. The other species nodded in agreement. The armored krill representatives clicked their mandibles approvingly, their beetle-like forms shifting in their seats. The Zephyrian delegation flexed their razor-sharp wing claws, remembering how easily they had defeated human athletes in interspecies competitions. Even the peaceful Moss-World's representatives, who rarely spoke in council, seemed to agree with soft rustling sounds that their translators interpreted as amusement. Captain Yuna, representing the human defense fleet, sat perfectly still in her simple grey uniform. No powered armor, no obvious weapons, no intimidating features at all. She looked small and vulnerable compared to the other military representatives. Her dark eyes watched the proceedings calmly, and when the Vrak pointed directly at her, she merely smiled and said nothing. It was the same smile human diplomats always wore, polite, understanding, almost apologetic. "Your defense fleets are a joke," the Vrak continued, pulling up tactical displays of recent skirmishes. "Your ships move like cargo haulers. Your weapons barely scratch our armor. Your soldiers fall down when we push them. We have records of human warriors being defeated by species half their size." The holographic evidence was damning. Human spacecraft appearing to lumber through space like ancient cargo vessels. Human soldiers stumbling during training exercises. Human athletes finishing last in galactic sporting events. Human negotiators appearing emotional and easily manipulated during trade discussions. "We require the mining rights to New Eden, Terra, Nova and Garden Station," the Vrak continued, his voice rising to a threatening roar. "Your species clearly cannot defend them adequately. These worlds contain resources vital to galactic security. They should be controlled by those capable of protecting them." The 3 worlds in question were humanity's agricultural jewels. New Eden fed half the outer colonies with its perfect climate and rich soil. Terra Nova provided rare minerals essential for spacecraft manufacturing. Garden Station was a massive orbital farm that supplied fresh food to dozens of species. Together, they represented nearly 30% of human economic output. Around the chamber, other species began to murmur agreement. The hegemony of Sharp Teeth saw an opportunity to claim neighboring systems. The Crystal Dynasties calculated the profit margins of taking over human trade routes. The Machine Collective's robotic representatives processed the data with cold logic and found human claims to these worlds statistically indefensible. Jin watched it all with the same calm expression his species was known for. He noticed how the other humans in the delegation maintained their composure. There was Yun, the trade representative, who had allowed alien merchants to cheat him in negotiations for years. There was Min, the military advisor who had lost arm wrestling contests to species 1/3 her size. There was Day, the science attaché, who had been publicly humiliated by alien academics in intellectual competitions. None of them looked angry, none of them looked scared. They all wore the same patient, understanding expressions that had become humanity's trademark in galactic politics. Jin stood slowly, his movement deliberate and calm. At barely 2 meters tall, he was dwarfed by most of the other species' representatives. His simple black suit looked primitive compared to the power armor and energy shields surrounding him. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that the chamber's amplification systems had to boost it for everyone to hear. "We will consider your request," he said softly, his voice carrying no anger, no threat, just the same measured tone humans always used in these chambers. "We understand your concerns about our defensive capabilities. Perhaps we can find a mutually beneficial arrangement." The VRAC representative smiled, showing all his teeth. "Good. You have 48 hours to respond. After that, we will take action to protect galactic interests." As the session ended, other species approached the VRAC with their own demands. If humanity was too weak to defend 3 worlds, surely they were too weak to defend dozens of others. The feeding frenzy was beginning. What the galaxy didn't know was that humanity had made a choice 30 years ago when they first joined the galactic community. Faced with species that could crush them physically, outfly them technologically, and outlive them biologically, humans had chosen not to compete. They had chosen to be good neighbors instead of apex predators. They had chosen restraint over strength, diplomacy over violence, cooperation over domination. It was a choice that had served everyone well. But choices, as the galaxy was about to learn, could always be changed. The VRAC battle fleet arrived at New Eden with overwhelming confidence, their ships cutting through space like predators approaching helpless prey. 50 destroyers spread out in perfect formation, their hulls bristling with plasma cannons and fusion torpedoes. Behind them, 3 massive dreadnoughts moved like floating cities, each one capable of cracking a planet's crust. The ships were works of art and terror, their obsidian armor reflecting the light of New Eden's sun like black mirrors. Admiral Zrak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Death's Talon, watching the human colony grow larger on his tactical display. His 4 eyes tracked the pathetic human defenses with amusement. One small orbital station that looked like it had been built from spare parts. A handful of freight haulers scattered around the system, a few passenger shuttles already beginning to flee like startled insects. "Signal the humans," Zrak ordered, his voice a harsh rasp that made his bridge crew flinch. "Tell them they have 1 hour to surrender the planet completely. Any resistance will be met with total destruction." On New Eden's surface, emergency sirens wailed across the farming settlements. Families grabbed what they could carry and ran for the evacuation ships. Children clutched toys while their parents carried emergency supplies. The settlers had always known this day might come, but they had hoped their peaceful existence would protect them. Captain Hana received the evacuation order while loading the last containers of grain into her freight hauler, the Peaceful Harvest. The ship was old and battered, built for carrying cargo between colonies, not for fighting wars. Her cargo hold was packed with enough grain to feed 3 outer colonies for a month. She had been making this run for 15 years, delivering food to places where nothing would grow. Through her viewports, she could see the VRAC fleet approaching like a swarm of metal hornets. Their ships moved with deadly precision, weapons, already charging for the slaughter to come. Around her, families were fleeing in passenger shuttles, their faces tight with fear. She watched a transport ship struggle to lift off, overloaded with refugees who had nowhere else to go. "This is Commander Tay of the defense station," came the voice over the comm, crackling with static from the VRAC jamming signals. "All civilian. Vessels maintain evacuation protocols. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage the enemy fleet." Tay's voice was calm, but Hana could hear the pain underneath. The defense station's guns were already tracking the incoming dreadnoughts, but everyone knew they were hopelessly outmatched. The station's weapons were designed to fight pirates and raiders, not a full battle fleet. Hana looked at her scanner display and felt her blood turn cold. The VRAC flagship was changing course, turning away from the military targets. Its massive guns were swiveling to track the evacuation ships. Red targeting beams reached out like fingers of death, painting the refugee transports with kill markers. "They're targeting the civilian ships," she whispered into her comm. "Commander, they're going after the evacuees." "I see it," Tay replied, his voice tight with rage. "All transports, evasive maneuvers, we're moving to intercept, but the defense station was too far away, and the transports were too slow." Hana watched the tactical display as the Vrak dreadnoughts' main guns began to charge. The energy readings were off the charts. Those weapons could vaporize the passenger ships in a single shot. She thought about the families on those transports, the children she had seen playing in the colony's gardens just yesterday. The farmers who had worked their whole lives to build something beautiful on this world. They were about to die, and the galaxy would call it just another territorial dispute. Hana looked down at her hands gripping the ship's controls. For 30 years, her people had chosen to be peaceful. They had chosen to appear weak rather than threaten their neighbors. They had chosen to lose rather than reveal what they really were. She keyed her communicator to the emergency channel, the one that connected to every human ship and station in the system. "This is Captain Hana of the Peaceful Harvest. I'm not running. What happened next would be remembered for generations." Hana pushed her engines to maximum burn and aimed directly at the Vrak flagship. The Peaceful Harvest accelerated like a missile, her fusion drive painting a blue streak across the darkness. The Vrak crew barely had time to register the incoming threat before the freight hauler slammed into their engine section at full velocity. The explosion lit up the entire system. The Peaceful Harvest vanished in a ball of superheated plasma that tore through the dreadnought's hull like paper. Secondary explosions rippled along the massive ship's spine as fuel lines ruptured and weapon magazines detonated. The deaths. Talon, pride of the Vrak fleet, broke apart in a cascade of fire and shattered metal. Admiral Zrak's last thought, as his bridge collapsed around him, was impossible confusion. How had a simple cargo ship moved so fast? How had its impact caused so much damage? What kind of freight hauler carried enough kinetic energy to destroy a dreadnought? The answers would have terrified him. Human ships had always been built stronger than they appeared. Human engines had always been capable of more than they showed. Human pilots had always been better than they pretended to be. Across human space, emergency communication arrays came alive with a simple message that spread from world to world, ship to ship, station to station. It was transmitted on frequencies that other species couldn't monitor, encoded in patterns that only humans would understand. Protocols are lifted. Repeat, protocols are lifted. In military bases, human soldiers received the message and felt something change inside them. The artificial limitations they had carried for 3 decades fell away like chains. On starships, human crews looked at their instrument panels with new eyes, seeing capabilities they had pretended didn't exist. The humans had stopped pretending. For the first time in 30 years, they were about to show the galaxy what Deathworlders really looked like when they stopped holding back. Captain Hana's sacrifice had lit a fuse that would burn across the stars. The change was immediate and terrifying. Above New Eden, the human defense station suddenly came alive like a sleeping giant awakening. Commander Tay stood at his command console, watching displays that he had never seen active before. For 30 years, he had operated this station at 20% capacity, following protocols that seemed designed to make humans appear helpless. "All weapon systems to full power," he ordered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Release engine limiters, activate emergency combat protocols." The station's fusion reactors roared to life, outputting energy. Levels that made the Vrak ship's sensors scream warnings. Weapons that had appeared to be simple point defense turrets unfolded into massive plasma cannons. The station's hull plating shifted and rearranged, revealing armor thick enough to withstand dreadnought fire. "Impossible," whispered the Vrak tactical officer aboard their remaining flagship. "Those energy readings are off the charts. How did they hide this much firepower?" The first shot from the human station answered his question. A lance of superheated plasma tore through space at nearly light speed, striking a Vrak destroyer dead center. The alien ship simply vanished, vaporized so completely that its death scream was cut short before it began. Meanwhile, human ships throughout the system were revealing their true nature. The cargo hauler, Lucky Strike, commanded by Captain Kyung, suddenly accelerated from a dead stop to combat velocity in seconds. Her ship twisted through space like a dancer, dodging Vrak missiles with movements that should have crushed her crew under impossible G-forces. "How are they surviving those accelerations?" screamed a Vrak pilot as he watched human ships perform. Maneuvers that would turn any normal crew into paste against their bulkheads. The answer was simple and horrifying. Humans had evolved on a planet with crushing gravity, in bodies designed to survive impacts that would shatter other species. What the aliens saw as impossible acceleration was just another day for creatures who had learned to function under Earth's relentless pull. Captain Kyung's ship spun around a Vrak destroyer, her guns tracking the alien vessel with precision no computer could match. Human reflexes, honed by evolution on a world where hesitation meant death, allowed her to process battle information faster than any artificial intelligence. "Target their reactor housing," she called to her gunner, Lieutenant Bin. 3-round burst, full power. The shots hit perfectly, each one placed with surgical precision to maximize damage while minimizing the explosion that might harm nearby. Evacuation ships. The Vrak destroyer died quietly, its crew never understanding how a simple cargo hauler had outflown and outgunned their military vessel. On New Eden's surface, the transformation was even more dramatic. Vrak ground forces had landed, expecting to face weak human defenders who would break at the first sign of real violence. Instead, they encountered something from their worst nightmares. Private Wu crouched behind a farming machine as plasma bolts scorched the air around him. The Vrak infantry advanced in perfect formation, their powered armor making them look like walking tanks. Their weapons could melt through steel, and their claws could slice through most alien species like butter. A plasma bolt caught Wu square, in the chest, burning through his simple body armor and searing his skin. Any normal soldier would have been dead instantly. Instead, Wu looked down at the smoking hole in his vest, checked that his rifle was still functional, and stood up. "That really hurt," he muttered, and kept advancing through the enemy fire. The Vrak soldiers froze in confusion. They had just delivered a killing shot, but the human was still moving. Impossible. Their weapons could drop a charging Krill warrior or stop a Zephyrian dive bomber in its tracks. Sergeant Grak, leader of the Vrak ground forces, decided to handle the problem personally. He leaped forward with his powered armor's jump jets, covering 20 meters in a single bound. His monomolecular claws extended, each one sharp enough to cut through ship armor. The slash caught Wu across the shoulder and chest, opening wounds. That would have incapacitated any known species. Blood flowed freely, and the cuts were deep enough to see bone. Grak smiled behind his helmet, waiting for the human to collapse. Instead, Wu calmly pulled medical tape from his kit and wrapped the cuts, never taking his eyes off the Vrak warrior. "So you done?" he asked politely, then continued his advance. "What are they?" screamed Grak as he retreated, his entire world view crumbling. "What kind of species fights with wounds like that?" The answer was spreading across the battlefield as human. Defenders revealed what they really were. Soldiers who could function with injuries that would kill others. Fighters who could survive explosions, radiation, and toxic atmospheres that made other worlds uninhabitable. Warriors who had evolved on a planet so dangerous that survival itself was an act of defiance. Back in the Galactic Council chambers, Ambassador Jin stood before the emergency session called to address the situation at New Eden. Representatives from dozens of species watched in stunned silence as battle reports flooded in. The Vrak fleet, the most powerful military force in this sector of the galaxy, was being systematically destroyed by humans who had pretended to be weaklings for 3 decades. Jin's demeanor had changed completely. Where once he seemed humble and gentle, now he radiated something far more dangerous. His posture was straighter, his voice carried an edge that made even the largest species nervous, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator that had stopped pretending to be prey. "Are you asked what we are?" Jin said simply, his words carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "We are Deathworlders, real ones. We evolved on a planet that kills the weak for breakfast, the unlucky for lunch, and the unprepared for dinner." Gestured to the tactical displays showing the battle at New Eden. "We survived ice ages that would have frozen your homeworld solid. We survived predators that make your worst nightmares look like pets. We survived diseases that could wipe out entire galactic sectors. Most importantly, we survived each other. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the energy beings stopped, their constant flickering, hanging motionless in the air like frozen lightning. For 30 years, we chose to hold back because we wanted to be civilized. We wanted to be good neighbors. We wanted to prove that strength and violence weren't the only ways to survive in this galaxy. Jin's smile was cold and sharp as a blade. That choice was never permanent. The reports from New Eden continued to pour in. Human ships were not just winning, they were dominating. Human soldiers were not just surviving, they were advancing through attacks that should have wiped them out. The Vrak fleet, one of the most feared military forces in known space, was falling apart against opponents they had dismissed as harmless farmers. The Vrak fleet at New Eden surrendered within 6 hours, their commanders too terrified to continue, fighting an enemy they couldn't understand. The humans, they realized, had been playing a game for 30 years. Now the game was over, and the galaxy was about to learn what it meant to face a species that had earned the right to call itself Deathworlders. News traveled fast through galactic networks, spreading like wildfire across thousands of star systems. Within hours of the Vrak surrender at New Eden, every major species in the galaxy was receiving detailed reports of what had happened. The impossible had occurred. Humans had revealed themselves to be far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. On the crystal world of Zephyros Prime, the Hive Queen called an emergency gathering of her advisors. The Zephyrians were proud warriors. Their chitinous bodies evolved for aerial combat, their razor-sharp wing claws capable of slicing through steel. For decades, they had dominated the galactic athletic competitions, their speed and agility unmatched by any other species. "Bring me the archives," the Queen commanded, her forewings buzzing with agitation. Every competition with human participants, every race, every contest, every game. The massive crystalline screens filled with footage from countless sporting events. There was Captain Rena, the human athlete they had pitied for years. In race after race, she had finished dead last, stumbling and gasping for air, while Zephyrian flyers soared past her effortlessly. The crowds had laughed. The announcers had made jokes about human weakness. But now the Queen watched with different eyes. She saw how Rena's breathing never actually changed, even during the most exhausting events. She noticed how the human's muscle tension remained constant, never showing the strain that should have accompanied such extreme effort. Most telling of all, she observed how Rena's eyes tracked every Zephyrian competitor with the focused attention of a predator studying prey. "Play the strength competition from 2 years ago," ordered General Zek, his mandibles clicking nervously. The footage showed Rena attempting to lift a weight that any Zephyrian could handle easily. She had struggled, strained, and finally given up with apparent exhaustion. The Zephyrian crowd had cheered mockingly. But now they could see the truth. Her grip on the weights was gentle, careful, as if she were handling delicate crystal rather than solid metal. "She was holding back enough strength to crush our exoskeletons," whispered the Queen in horror. All of them were. Across the galaxy, similar realizations were spreading. On the machine world of Kogatron, the robotic collective's central processing units worked overtime, analyzing 30 years of interactions with humans. Their logical minds processed the data with growing alarm. The Crystalline Confederacy's leadership gathered in their floating palace above the gas giant Prismatica. These beings were masters of negotiation, their crystal-based minds capable of processing thousands of variables simultaneously. They had always prided themselves on being the galaxy's greatest diplomats and strategists. "Retrieve all records." "Tov human negotiator Mira," commanded Prime Crystal Nexus, his faceted form pulsing with confused light patterns. The archives displayed decades of trade negotiations, peace talks, and diplomatic meetings. In every single one, Mira had appeared emotional and easily manipulated. She had cried during difficult negotiations, pleaded when things went against humanity's interests, and seemed to break down under pressure from superior alien intellects. But, now examining the recordings with suspicion instead of superiority, the Confederacy saw something different. Every tear had been perfectly timed. Every emotional outburst had resulted in exactly the concessions humanity needed. Every apparent breakdown had led to deals that seemed favorable to other species, but actually gave humans long-term advantages. Her neural patterns, observed secondary crystal flux, analyzing the biometric data. They never showed actual distress. Her heart rate, her brain activity, her hormone levels, they were all controlled. She was performing. Prime Nexus dimmed. With shame. She played us like instruments. For 30 years we thought we were outsmarting humans in negotiations. Instead, she was letting us think we were winning while she got everything she actually wanted. Military bases across the galaxy buzzed with frantic activity as defense analysts pulled footage of human soldiers in action, the hegemony of Sharp. Teeth, a warrior species that had conquered dozens of worlds, had always dismissed human military capabilities as laughably weak. General Roth stood in his war room, watching combat footage from joint training exercises. Human soldiers stumbling during obstacle courses. Human warriors being easily defeated in hand-to-hand combat. Human pilots losing dogfights against superior alien reflexes. Focus on the human called Bo, Roth commanded his analysts, the one who lost to our youngest cadets in single combat. The footage showed Bo being thrown around by alien fighters half his size. He had seemed clumsy, slow, unable to match the natural weapons and armor of other species. But now, frame-by-frame analysis revealed the truth. Every fall was controlled. Every hit he took was positioned to minimize actual damage. Most disturbing of all, every counterattack he made was pulled at the last second, striking with just enough force to seem real without actually harming his opponents. He could have killed them all, whispered Lieutenant Score, his scales rippling with fear. Every human in those exercises could have slaughtered our entire training battalion. The Machine Collective's analysis was perhaps the most thorough. Their artificial intelligence networks processed every piece of data, every interaction, every seemingly innocent moment where humans had appeared inferior. The results were terrifying in their implications. Human reaction times were not slow. They were artificially delayed. Human ships were not weak. They were operating under massive power restrictions. Human weapons were not inadequate. They were deliberately miscalibrated. For 30 years, an entire species had been acting out an elaborate deception, making themselves appear harmless while quietly building one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Jin stood before an emergency session of the Galactic Council, held just 12 hours after the battle at New Eden ended. The massive chamber was packed with representatives from hundreds of species, their usual confident chatter replaced by nervous whispers and fearful glances. The floating platforms that held each delegation seemed to hover closer together, as if proximity might provide protection from this new threat. The holographic displays around the chamber showed tactical analyses of the New Eden battle. Human ships performing impossible maneuvers, human weapons demonstrating power levels that defied previous measurements, human soldiers surviving attacks that should have been instantly fatal. "You pretended to be weak," whispered the Aquatic Collective's representative, her tentacles trembling in the water-filled environment bubble that kept her alive in the chamber's atmosphere. Jin looked around the chamber at hundreds of alien faces, each one showing the same expression of betrayed confusion. These beings had spent decades believing they were superior to humanity, making decisions based on assumptions that had just been shattered. "We chose restraint," Jin corrected calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "We chose to be kind neighbors rather than apex predators. We chose cooperation over domination. We chose to build trust rather than fear." His eyes swept across the assembled representatives, meeting the gaze of species that had once looked down on humanity with contempt. But kindness, honored colleagues, should never be mistaken for weakness. And trust, once broken, is very difficult to rebuild. The galaxy was beginning to understand that they had been living next to sleeping giants for 30 years. Now those giants were awake, and no one knew what would happen next. 6 months had passed since the galaxy learned the truth about humanity. The stars themselves seemed quieter now, as if the universe was still processing what it had witnessed. Trade routes that once buzzed with constant chatter now carried conversations in hushed tones. Ships from dozens of species kept respectful distances from the distinctive blue and silver vessels of the human fleet. Captain Hyun walked the bridge of his new command ship, the Serenity's Edge. As the newly appointed fleet commander for the entire Outer Rim sector, he oversaw 300 vessels spread across 40 star systems. The irony wasn't lost on him that they'd given him the largest military command in human history right after proving they didn't need to use it. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Zephyrian trade convoy," his communications officer announced. Lieutenant Park, barely 22 years old, still seemed amazed by the deference other species now showed them. "Put them through," Hyun replied. Settling into his command chair, the holographic display flickered to life, revealing the elongated features of a Zephyrian captain, her blue-tinted skin slightly pale. "A human vessel. This is Captain Veltar of the merchant fleet Starweaver. We're requesting permission to enter human-protected space. We have supplies for the refugee camps on Kepler 442b. Permission granted, Captain. Safe travels." Hyun watched as the convoy of 12 ships adjusted course, maintaining the new standard distance of 50,000 kilometers from any human vessel, not because they were required to, but because they wanted to. Things had changed dramatically since the Vrak surrender. The entire Vrak battle fleet had powered down their weapons and transmitted unconditional surrender codes within hours of witnessing humanity's true capabilities. Their emperor, a being who had conquered 17 star systems, had personally traveled to Ambassador Jin's diplomatic station to sign the treaty. The surrender had rippled across the galaxy like a shockwave. Species that had been preparing for war suddenly reversed course. The crystalline hegemony, whose silicon-based warriors were legendary for their stubbornness, sent formal apologies for misunderstanding human intentions. Even the machine intelligences of the Nexus Collective, who rarely communicated with organic life, transmitted data packets expressing their desire for continued peaceful coexistence. On the planet Zirion Prime, in a classroom filled with young beings from 6 different species, teacher Kethra was explaining recent galactic history to her students. The reptilian educator had lived through the human-Vrak conflict and watched everything change. "Who can tell me what happened on the day the humans revealed their true strength?" she asked. A small Tenthari student, her purple tentacles wiggling with excitement, raised 3 appendages. "They showed everyone they were hiding their real power." "That's right, Zilna. But why do you think they hid it?" An older Vrak student, whose family had fled the Empire after the surrender, spoke quietly. "Because they didn't want to hurt anyone unless they had to." Kethra nodded approvingly. "Exactly. The humans taught us that real strength isn't about showing off power. It's about choosing when to use it." This lesson was being taught across thousands of worlds, in hundreds of languages. The story had become legend almost overnight. How the species everyone thought they understood had been holding back all along. How their kindness hadn't been weakness, but incredible self-control. Meanwhile, on the diplomatic station orbiting Centauri B, Ambassador Jin was hosting his weekly meeting with former enemies turned partners. The circular conference room held representatives from 12 species, including former Vrak generals and hegemony war chiefs. "The mining rights to the Andorian asteroid belt are still disputed," reported General Thekmor, a massive hegemony warrior whose crystalline body caught the light from the stars outside. "My people and the Vrak colonists can't agree on extraction. Quotas. Before the war, this would have been settled with weapons. Now they were asking humans to mediate. What do both sides need most?" Jin asked, leaning forward in his chair. "Rare earth elements for our growing colonies," answered Vrak Representative Sector, his scaled hands folded diplomatically on the table. "And we require silicon compounds for our offspring's maturation chambers," Thekmor added. Jin smiled. "Those resources don't overlap. Why not divide the belt by mineral type instead of territory? Each group gets what they actually need." The solution was simple, but it required trust. 6 months ago, neither species would have accepted human arbitration. Now, they competed to show their cooperation with humanity's peaceful suggestions. The Transformation went deeper than politics. On trading stations throughout the galaxy, human merchants found themselves treated with almost religious respect. Captain Lisa Chen, transporting medical supplies to the frontier colonies, was regularly offered the best docking bays and fastest service. When she tried to pay standard rates, station masters would often refuse payment entirely. "Consider it. Thanks for keeping the peace," they would say. But perhaps the most significant change was in space itself. Human patrol ships now moved openly with their defensive shields down and weapons powered to minimal levels. Yet pirates and raiders gave them wider berths than ever before. Word had spread through the criminal networks. Humans weren't pretending anymore, and their mercy had limits. Commander Torres, leading a patrol near the neutral zone, received a distress call from a civilian transport under attack by raiders. When his squadron arrived, they found the attackers already fleeing at maximum speed, leaving the transport unharmed. "This is civilian transport. New Dawn," came the grateful transmission. "Thank you for responding so quickly," Torres checked his instruments. "We're still 20 minutes away from your position." "We know, Commander. The raiders saw you coming on long-range sensors and decided not to wait around." The human reputation had become its own weapon, one that protected the innocent without firing a shot. Back on Earth, news reports showed footage from across the galaxy. Human colonies were thriving, trade was booming, and for the first time, in decades, no major conflicts were brewing anywhere in known space. The cost had been revealing their true capabilities, but the benefit was a peace more stable than any treaty could provide. Ambassador Jin stood in his private quarters, looking out at the swirling nebula that painted the void in shades of purple and gold. His communication console chimed with an incoming message marked Priority 1 from Earth's Colonial Authority. He opened the encrypted transmission and read the brief message. Situation report requested. Should humanity return to previous operational limitations now that peace is secured? Awaiting instructions. Jin stared at the message for a long moment, then walked to his window again. In the distance, he could see ships from dozens of species moving through space lanes that had been battlefields 6 months ago. Children were being born on worlds that had expected to be destroyed. Scientists were sharing research that could benefit everyone. He returned to his desk and began typing his reply. To Earth Colonial Authority, negative. Current operational status should be maintained indefinitely. The galaxy's stability depends not on our hidden strength, but on their understanding of our restraint. We have shown them what we choose not to do. This awareness serves as the foundation for lasting peace. Recommend permanent policy change, transparency in capability, restraint in application. The greatest power is in the choice to show mercy, and that choice must remain visible. Jin out. He sent the message and returned to his window. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new requests for mediation, new opportunities to prove that humanity's strength lay not in their weapons or their technology, but in their wisdom to know when not to use them. The galaxy was learning to trust again, and trust was the most powerful force in the universe.